Hey guys, STLYoungblood with you, following up on our previous discussion where we discussed salvage and industry with Clem, Brent, and Rock. Now we're going to go ahead and jump into a number of ships and player balance. And basically the intention here is to really kind of talk through some different scenarios that we may end up having in-game. We start talking about the most common example that's been discussed for years based on some statements that CIG has made and then some ways they've bounced around. But, a constellation, for example, with 3 people on board versus 3 Super Hornets, in like solo players. So you're technically in a 3v3 battle there. How does that end up playing out? Well, I think we all know today that the 3 Super Hornets are going to win against the Constellation because turrets are terrible, and they're going to outmaneuver it. So, even with turret improvements, you still have some maneuverability challenges. So I think there's some real decisions that you almost need to make in game based on how things end up being balanced, based on what's going to be the optimal way that you load out your fleet. If you're going on a combat mission, does it really make sense to bring something like a Constellation, which is a bigger, powerful ship than a Super Hornet, but if you can bring more Super Hornets, there's a return on investment there as far as the power that you're bringing to the fight. So I don't know if you guys have any dialogue you want to start off with there, but I think it's a really complicated balancing area, and I think it's one that CIG has to figure out, and we have to then figure out based on how that balance plays out.
Mm-hmm. Well, like you said, I mean, right now the turrets aren't effective really at all. They're a little bit of a deterrent, I guess, that you don't want to just park off the side of a big ship. But other than that, they certainly can't compensate. So I feel like turrets need to improve, but even still, I mean, historically, a B-17 was bristling with guns, and a B-17, which had a crew of, I think, 7 or 8, was not a match for 7 or 8 Luftwaffe fighters. I mean, if it was the only target around, they were going to take it out because they could just come up and just chew it apart little by little. I think that there has to be something else that the big ship brings to the table besides just firepower in most cases, unless it's a dedicated combat ship. Now, based on the description, I imagine that the Polaris may, even though it has a large crew requirement, I think it may actually be worth that crew in terms of its ability to deal with fighters because it has so many turrets, and the description indicates that between its armor and shields that it's essentially impervious to, arena commander weaponry, right? That things like, your size 2 and 3 guns are just not going to impress it. So you're beating your head against a wall there if you're in even something like a Super Hornet or something like that. That's the description. Obviously, we won't know until they get it in game and balance it. But I think that more fighters are generally going to be better for combat, but they also have limitations. There's range limitations. Anything that requires you to take cargo along, obviously there's severe limitations if you don't have a big ship. So I think that's where the balance is going to come from, not so much raw firepower.
I'm wondering how much, like, comparing AI and NPC to the player experience is going to matter. And I've been playing a lot of Pirate Swarm lately, and especially if you're playing that in single player, usually by the time you're getting into wave 15 and on, you're by yourself. Your AI co-pilots have died, and you're taking on a Connie with a fighter. And I have not seen that to go well yet. I'm sure that we've got some amazing pilots out there that can do that. But I've taken everything from a Vanguard to a Super Hornet to a Saber to a Freelancer of all things and gotten hammered by that one Connie. So, I mean, the game allows for it. It's just that the player experience doesn't really make it viable right now. So I'm wondering if maybe that's the area where they can up their ante.
Well, and I think a lot of that has to do with just the way that the AI can interact with the other AI. And the AI turret isn't requiring, a AI pilot to really do a good job of keeping it in their sights based on communication. Their logic plays together well, and the pilot's automatically doing the right things. And then there's the complication of the fact that the AI that's controlling the turret doesn't really have the issues that we have as far as, trying to visually stabilize what's taking place. I'm no coder, but I'm pretty confident that what's happening there is it's saying the target that I'm shooting at is here. my guns will automatically now point here, and then there's probably some logic there based on the quality of the gunner there on how often that they're actually going to land their targets. When you start talking about a player-controlled ship, that gets a lot more complicated because you have to coordinate, and especially on ships like Retaliator, for God's sakes, where it's got 5 turrets all over the place, trying to actually keep your turret gunners on target is a miserable experience. And even in something like a Freelancer where you've got just one turret, that's got a lot of challenges to face with it too. So I think there's 2 things that are coming that are probably going to have a pretty significant impact to how we end up looking at this question. The first of which being the turret improvements. We've seen a lot of things that have been thrown out by CIG as far as what they want to do to actually make improvements. Some like gyroscopic abilities, some better tracking, some more control to the turret gunner, etc. But then the other one's obviously going to be the more complicated one that's been brought up, is going to be what we initially were told was going to be the AI blade to give the pilot control over the turret, which is going to be great, obviously. That doesn't do much for overall control of the ship. But then there was the other one there that was just the overall AI, as far as the turret is now going to be controlled by some sort of artificial intelligence and is now able to do like auto turret functions. So you've almost got the situation where you've got NPCs as an option, you've got pilot control as an option, or you've got an auto turret as an option. And that changes the game a little bit.
Well, the thing is that with AI, it's a program, it's code, right? So you can dial in and out how good they are on how effective they are at touching the target. Whereas as a player, there's a human limit to basically one pilots the ship, turns right, turns left, the other guy tries to aim but is not reading the mind of the other guy, and there's going to be, yes, there's improvement that it comes over time in terms of having good communication between the pilot and the rest of the team, but it will never be to the level of what you can dial in or out with an AI. So in terms of for combat missions and combat gameplay, the large ship there's going to be so it's going to be impressive from a visual standpoint, but in terms of effectiveness in the game, so when we had the show previously about industrial ships, yes, that's a whole different ball game where the large Orion, Reclaimer, and so on will have more of an impact in doing the job, right? But it's 2 different. One is action, the other one is efficiency. So
yeah. I think that's a good call out, and I think when we kind of start taking this to another level, I think some of this may end up being player decision based on what your goals are and what threats you think you're going to be coming across. And this kind of plays to Brento's point. I think if you're saying that, well, 90% of the time we're fighting other fighters, so I'm going to bring my Super Hornet along, and you're going to bring your Saber along, and you're going to bring your Buccaneer along, and all of a sudden we're going to be able to take on Constellation and up. That's a great scenario until you start running into an Idris or a Javelin or a Polaris or a Kingship. All of a sudden you start getting into bigger options, and then you say, well, is that one Connie a better option at that point than 3 fighters? It might be. It's more durable for sure. Now it's a bigger target and it's not as nimble, but it's able to actually deal a little bit of damage. Now, granted, that's not a great example because we're talking about a freighter versus a dedicated combat ship, but you kind of get the idea where I'm talking about is there's probably there's a point to where the larger weaponry and capabilities of a larger ship is a better option when dealing with a bigger threat. It's more about knowing what you're getting into, or maybe striking that balance to be prepared for whatever you're going to be facing, as opposed to just kitting out for one particular mission.
Well, a big ship will be efficient against a big ship. You think of a gun, a large hunter gun shooting a bear or deer or whatever, but if you try to chase like mosquitoes away, you're gonna go anywhere, right?
Yeah.
Oh, and the other part of that is like the crew stations they keep going on about. If you're talking about engineering, shields, all the little subsystems that you're going to have to deal with, especially in the larger ships, maybe we find out that having 2 or 3 people sitting in a Connie and then using AI turrets, that's going to be a very effective unit in a small fleet. Whereas that 4th or 5th or 6th player, they need to be in a Super Hornet or they need to be running another Connie, because they're nowhere near as effective in a single turret as they could be in another fighter.
Right.
There's another thing also about like in your example, is that when you have a ship with 5 turrets, they're not all on the same side and so on. So how do you ensure, even as with, if you have good coordination and teamwork, you cannot have all of them able to aim at the same time, and so it's tricky.
Yeah.
Well, like they were talking about being able to use a console and control a remote turret. That was something that was brought up in an ATV several months ago now. You know, if you've got 3 guys that can man all 5 turrets, they just switch between the turret they need to be in charge of at a time. That's an interesting force multiplier.
Yeah. I think overall, the overall goal of having the 5 turrets around like a Retaliator, you know, it's more about just overall coverage. You know, the point of a Retaliator is to get in, drop the bombs, and get out. And it's got some staying power based on the turrets that are located around the ship. But I think it's more of a, we're going to form a bubble of aggression, and hopefully you're not able to penetrate that bubble, and we're going to make sure that we don't have a blind spot so we can complete our mission. You know, Polaris is probably kind of a bigger scale in a similar way. You know, I think we've got 4 or 5 manned turrets on that ship and a couple unmanned turrets too. So, yeah, I think there's some complications there. I think the problem that we're going to have in this arena, in this discussion, is that there's never a situation to where one person in a turret is going to be more valuable than a person in a single seat ship. And never is a strong word, but if you think about the capabilities of a turret, even on a Polaris, you've got 2 size 4 weapons. Well, if I'm bringing a Super Hornet along, I've got 3 size 3 weapons, and I can put a size 4 on the back if I use a flash fire. And I can control my ship. I can go where I want. I can make my own decisions. I'm not relying on somebody else. There becomes a lot of complication there to where it's just, you have better options. Now, there's obviously cost and risk associated with that. You know, it costs more to bring another ship along than it does to just sit somebody in a turret. But that's going to be a really interesting piece to follow there. And I think we all like to say that we want to get together and we want to run a fleet and we want to have people in each other's ships and running stations and things, but is it always better to be your own captain and just have NPCs in the back? I don't know. It might end up being the case.
You bring an aspect also, is that aside from efficiency and what's better, what's not, in the end, it's a game, and people play the game to have fun, and it might be just more fun, and all sort of funny situations can arise from having all of the same guys together in the one ship, and how everything screws up, and something goes wrong, and it's funny, and so in the end, where you say, well, yes, it's less effective, it's less good, but we're just having a blast, it's just funny, and just playing the game.
Yeah, well, I think when it comes to, once you get to the private server aspect of things, putting everybody in a ship that you don't have to worry about losing because it's a private server, you can do whatever you want in there, I think you're going to see more multiplayer there than anywhere, because your risk has gone downhill. You're not in your frickin' your Javelin that you spent a lot of real world money on anymore. You're in a Javelin that you can have 5 of with a click of a mouse. So now it makes sense to shove 5 people in there and just go ham.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, who knows? You know, maybe all of this changes the second, you know, the turret rework happens. You know, and I think there's probably one very simple change that can be made, and I say simple as far as my mind, not necessarily in how to program this, but, you know, if you give some sort of just gyroscopic ability to the turrets to where, unless the ship moves to a point to where you physically can't see the location anymore, and then it kind of snaps you over, if your mouse isn't moving and the ship is moving in various angles around it, I want that turret staying pointed exactly where I am. I don't want to have to counteract for the movements that are happening with the ship, and that alone would have a massive improvement on the overall turret experience and capabilities.
Today,
yes, I would.
Real world, so.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean,
we see no tanks.
Never mind main battle tanks. Selfie sticks have that technology, so.
Well, and that's where I see the remote control as being a very interesting thing. Imagine you've got a station when you're managing 3 turrets, and you've got a 360 view of the ship. Wherever you point is where you shoot. And if it needs to pull a turret from somewhere else to make that shot, that's just what it does. That tends to scare people when they get shot at no matter where they go.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, perfect. Well, we're going to go ahead and call this discussion a done for part 2. So, like I said, if you guys have thoughts on this, this is a really complicated balancing decision. So, you know, for those of you that are watching, please leave some comments in the description of this video, because I think I speak for all 4 of us when I say if you guys have a great idea, we'd love to read it, just because this is a discussion we've had in the Patron Discord channel, I don't know, 12,000 times.
I don't know, three times a day almost, sometimes.
Because there's so many different scenarios. So if you guys think you found the magic equation there, please share it. We'd love to talk through it. Otherwise, stay tuned. We're going to have another part regarding hacking coming very soon. So go ahead and say goodbye for now, and we'll talk to you guys soon.